All right, we're listening to Okie from Muskogee by Merle Haggard for a reason. We'll learn about that in just a quick second. So welcome to our Lunchtime Talk series that we're featuring each week in September as we all head back to school. I'd like you to imagine that we're all gathered around a quick lunch in the cafeteria or the faculty break room and having an intimate conversation about big ideas. I know we're all a little bit tired of these Zooms. I know I am. I assume you are too. We're a little tired of these Zooms, but the plus is that some of these conversations we wouldn't be able to have without this shift that happened over the pandemic. This ability for everybody to gather from around the country on a regular basis to hear from brilliant thinkers and to learn from each other. And that's what we're doing with this, but we want to think about it a little more conversational, a little less webinar-y, a little more hanging out. This series is at noon Eastern time today, on the 22nd and on the 22nd, and at 2:30 on the 29th, our top Eastern. Our topic for today focuses on the topic that weighs so heavily on all of our minds. How can we get the funding needed to do the really high quality STEM work that we all want to do? It's the elephant in all the rooms. Every time we have a meeting, I'm sure all of you have this too. If we have a meeting and we say, if one of the questions that we have for a table conversation is, what are your needs? What are the obstacles? The number one thing is always money, to the point where I don't know about you, but I often say, don't even talk about money. I get it. I know it. We'll address it, but don't even bring it up because it's always the issue. We're going to bring it up today. We're going to talk about it today. How can we work smarter to access the unprecedented funding that's available today so that we can scale and replicate all the incredible work that we see across the SLE-COP? And here with us today with someone who's exceptionally skilled and has loads of experience in harnessing the funding at hand to leverage high quality STEM experiences for all students, Dr. Kathy Dodd. Dr. Dodd will help us understand how we strategically navigate these funding waters that we find ourselves swimming in right now. So Dr. Dodd from the Oklahoma State Department of Education. Kathy Dodd serves as the Chief Innovation Officer and the Deputy Superintendent of Federal Programs. In addition to overseeing the traditional title programs, Dr. Dodd is responsible for the state's budgeting, planning, and distribution of the $2.3 billion in ESSR funds to LEAs and strategic statewide initiatives. Her passion is working with districts and community partners to align strategic plans to braided funding streams to create scalable, sustainable programming that maximizes student outcomes. Dr. Dodd, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm not an Okie from Muskogee, but I'm fairly close. I'm in Tulsa, northeastern Oklahoma, so that works. Thank you so much for having me on today. I love the fact that you mentioned that funding is always the biggest concern, but when I work with leaders across my own state, I always challenge them to not start with, I have a grant. Now, what's the eligible expenditure so that I can start spending it? You're skipping the most important step. And it's like, what are you striving to accomplish? How does this fund or this grant, this tranche of funding coming through the feds, how does it help you execute on your primary goals, your strategic plan? And sometimes I think that's been easier to do to keep people a little more goal focused whenever they didn't have so much money. But sometimes the money, in this case with ESSR, the money came so fast and really so much. And it came at a time when our leaders weren't just focusing on this new availability of funds. They were also trying to keep their schools open and their students safe and keep teachers engaged and in the classroom. And so this has just been an additional challenge, but I want to flip that too and say this is an incredible opportunity. So we'll talk about that today as the opportunity in front of us. I know you're already in the arena, you're already working with these funds. Just quickly, we're going to go over the ESSR funds, and then I want to share some fiscal transparency resources that you may not know exist, but will help give you a lens into what funding is sitting where in each of your respective states and with your respective partners. We'll talk about some of the specific challenges, opportunities for that ESSR 3 20% learning loss to try to address unfinished learning. We'll talk about some STEM-related purchases, and then a few little conversation starters with district leaders. So I know our time's going to go really fast. I am a fast talker, so I'll try to go as quickly as we possibly can so that we have time for Q&A at the end. Xan, give me like the time out or slow down if I'm flying through this too quickly. So just as a review, as you know, there are 3 tranches of funds that came in through pandemic relief. The elementary and secondary emergency relief funds, or ESSR, and they're designated for public schools. There are other funds like EANS or GEARS or the HERS funds that come for higher ed. We're just going to focus on what's available for K-12. And the first tranche of funds, ESSR 1, I just want to call to your attention, that obligation deadline is right on us right now. Schools have to have an obligation of all of their ESSR funds by September the 30th of 2022, right now. And of course, just to reiterate, it must be for activities that prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID. Pretty much the same rules are in place for ESSR 2. A little bit longer expiration date. We have until this time next year, but then it's really those ESSR 3 funds that I find when I'm working with leaders that they had to create a plan for early on when the funds were released. They had to do that meaningful consultation with stakeholder groups. They couldn't just get in a room with their friends, the other administrators, and decide this is what we're doing with all of these funds. The guidance, the requirement for allocating funds is that you have to involve a diverse stakeholder group that helps decide how to spend the funds. You have to then translate that wish for how you want the funds to be expended into a uses of funds plan that has to be approved by your state Department of Education. Like I said, those plans got created very early on. The opportunity, I think, that's before all of you and before me at the state level is a chance to ask leaders to revisit that uses of funds plan and make sure that what is in it still reflects the priorities that they have today. Because what we saw when we approved uses of funds plan early on is people were, still in the throes of COVID. Sometimes the things they put in there were not the most progressive. They were eligible funds, but they weren't as student driven as they possibly could be. So this is a great chance for leaders to come back and revisit that uses of funds plan. Within that plan, there is a requirement for 20% learning loss. I'm going to wait to talk more about that because I have a list of some of the things that will fall in that category of eligible expenditures for that 20%. But the other thing I want to call to your attention when you're speaking with districts is the elevation of a chance to reach those students who are disproportionately affected by COVID. And the ESSR 3 calls that out in specific. And when we talk about students disproportionately affected by COVID, we're talking about students who are on free and reduced lunch, students of color, students who have been impacted by homelessness, who have been in the foster care system, students who are served by an IEP. There are students who are also, it's very important in my state, students who have a tribal affiliation, so Native students. When we're thinking about planning activities for ESSR 3 funding, yes, it has to be 20% learning loss, and that's the floor, by the way. A minimum of 20% needs to be student related. And then you can definitely go above it. And we are stretching our schools to go above, especially because ESSR 1 and 2 allowed for the purchases of a lot of things, a lot of items and construction and a lot of the cleanliness issues that popped up as a result of the pandemic. So people bought a lot of things out of ESSR 1 and 2. ESSR 3 is really about creating those strategic interventions and enrichment opportunities that help address that unfinished learning that is a result of the pandemic. So the magnifying lens needs to be more on that student impact, so that when we all know these are one-time funds, these are not going to continue at this level. So when it's all said and done, we'll be able to look back and say, Yes, this was kind of a WPA moment for our schools. They got to repair a lot of buildings and do some things that our schools desperately needed. But we also had this flexibility, this sandbox of innovation where we were able to try some things out that were always something we wanted to do, but may not have had the designated funding for it. The ESSR 3 funds in specific give us that innovative opportunity to try things out and not just be in that federal programs kind of rut that sometimes we find ourselves in, even with our title programming. So just to jump in here, this is the transparency portal. And I don't know, I'd love to just kind of with a thumbs up, if this is something that you've ever seen before, let me know with a thumbs up on your screen. This is something that the U.S. Department of Education has put together. I'm not going to click into it right now. If we have some time at the very end, I will click through. But what it allows you to do is see the entire allocation of ESSR. And then I know there are people on this call from all over the country. It allows you to look at how much was awarded in your state. And you see here on the purple button, the awarded radio button is engaged. Next to it is a percent spent. So you can also click on your state. I'm proud to say, I think Oklahoma is third from the top in spending our ESSR funds. And it gives me a rundown of where those funds are remaining. So here's my Oklahoma dashboard where I can see exactly how much of the money is in each of these 3 tranches in total. We received as a state 2.3 billion. And you can see with that September 30 deadline for CARES or ESSR 1 looming, we have spent 99.3% of those funds. We have 84.4% of the funding spent in ESSR 2 or the CRISA Act. And then rightfully so, the topic of our talk today is about ESSR 3 because that's the amount of money that remains. And it's the one that's focused the most in your wheelhouse for the people who are on this call. And in both cases, the last slide and then on this one, we've popped the presentation in the slide deck. That is a live link and you can feel like I'm back in the classroom and I just put the robotics parts out on the table while I was talking. That was probably a big mistake to tell you to click here because you're going to click there and start looking. But so I want to go over just a few of the examples of some allowable expenditures from that 20%, because when I'm new in my role, I've been at the department for about a year, just over a year, and I have a brand new team. And one of the things that afforded us is the need to educate ourselves, not from folklore of what had happened, been passed down from part Title I, and then maybe mixed in with ESSR, maybe a more constricting interpretation of what was eligible, but it allowed us to really go back and look at the guidance. And in our department, we talk about trying to get to yes. And we also talk about giving schools those guardrails. We don't want to give them such a close interpretation of the rules that we keep innovation from happening, when that is a big focus of what these funds are designed to do. So we want to ensure that everything that we have on here is allowable. And we want to be able to coach districts on how to use that allowability to, again, achieve their goals. So I know many of you are in that expanded learning space. And so anything that happens in-school acceleration, any of the startup costs, if you're going to start a new engineering course, if you're going to add a dual credit course, partner with a local university and add a course. And sometimes the sciences, STEM areas get left out because a lot of time on dual credit and concurrent, people go just for what's easier to do virtually. But you can bring that instructor to the school and you can outfit a class if there's additional materials or equipment that are needed for that class. So it can be anything from the cost of the instructor or the partner to come in and deliver that instruction, to tuition fees, books, transportation, you name it. There's a lot of flexibility for in-school acceleration. We've had several schools in Oklahoma spend a good chunk of ESSR 2 and 3 on creating a makerspace. And the great thing about that, you see construction is the last bullet, but it's hard to talk about the makerspace without talking about holistically how to leverage these funds, because it allows you to pay for the teacher or the partner to come in and deliver that instruction. It allows you to buy the equipment, curriculum, materials. It allows you to do a renovation and change maybe, you know, a classroom that was designed for something else, didn't have the right tables. Maybe they have their desks and you need table space and you need storage. You can absolutely purchase those things with your ESSR funds. So that's been exciting, because again, when we look back and say we've invested these billions of dollars, we want to see upgrades to buildings, but we want to see new and relevant opportunities for students. We want to have definitely be able to point to those expanded opportunities for kids. So you probably, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on intervention or mediation and tutoring. That's pretty straightforward. That's kind of like a Title I expenditure. But with out of school time and enrichment programming, sometimes our district leaders don't realize that you can pay a stipend for someone. You don't have to twist someone's arm to stay after school and manage that robotics club. You can pay contracted services for a partner. Exanne and I have worked together through the Tulsa Regional STEM Alliance. And I know, you know, she worked in my district when I was at Union Public Schools. She brought tremendous resources to my schools. And that's an opportunity for us to use that braided, blended funding to say, I can buy materials, or I can contract with you to have your staff come in and deliver that experience for my students. All of those things are options under ESSR 3. So keep that in mind. And then in my state, weirdly enough, before our new team came, we had said no to technology out of that 20% learning loss. And it's very clear and straightforward in the guidance that technology is allowable. So I bring up that example because we know you're partnering with state departments of education. We all have a little, even though this is all federal guidance, we all administer this grant a little bit differently, but this is a good chance to ask questions if something is a no, and look at the guidance yourself, which I've linked in the resources. Look at the guidance, look at the FAQs, and see if you can get to yes. So another big important part of this work is around student support services. So any wraparound services, I know that's not directly STEM related, but wraparound services, mental health resources, a lot of enrichment opportunities, again, can be coded to that social emotional learning component. And then construction, I mentioned earlier, it can be for renovations or new construction. Definitely checking in with your State Department of Education. We have a construction application process. If it's a big project, it requires a GC, some engineering. Great, yay, engineering. Some engineering services to come in and help make sure that the structures being built for the district are ones that are being built in a responsible way, and also adhering to the Davis-Bacon Act, which is the prevailing wage laws that go into effect when you're working in a federal grant. So then the last piece on this with construction is many people don't think of play spaces and outdoor learning experiences as core instruction, but I know the people in this room think of it as that. Out of school time is such a critical part of what we need to offer our students, and they miss so much of those experiences during the pandemic. So you can create outdoor classrooms. You can do a pavilion that allows for, if you're doing STEM outside or science outside, you can create the space that allows for that to happen, including laying concrete. We've had some really exciting nature trails that have been built within our state, and they've put little science stations along the way. And they've used it both for physical fitness. They've invited their community in, but it has science. It kind of is a learning walk and helps families know how to engage with their child in nature. And that's been something that they've done under the social distancing provision and the expanded learning space within ESSR.
So, Kathy, before you move on, Jeff Remington's got a question about some of this funding. Jeff, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to unmute now for a moment. Could you ask your question?
Yeah. Hi, Kathy. I was wondering, with the EANS Act, is that going to mirror what's happening with ESSA 3 for those private schools? Will they have the same kinds of things with ESSA 3?
Unfortunately, no. My office also administers EANS funds, and there are a lot more restrictions to EANS, including even a shorter performance period for those funds. So I would be happy, Jeff, to connect with you outside of this particular. I know we're on a short timeline here.
That would be great.
But we do administer EANS. We have 70 schools that take advantage of $60 million, but we have found it truly way harder to spend that small amount of money because of the additional provisions than the flexibility that's afforded through ESSR 3. But thank you for asking.
Okay, thanks, Kathy.
Sure. Any other questions before we jump into some of the things top of mind for school leaders?
The only thing that's been in the chat so far, and we can just answer it now, is a couple of folks have direct message, and I think Henry said in the chat about whether or not this deck, which has a lot of useful links and information, will be available to everyone. And if you're not reading the chat as we go along, Xan has already answered that yes, it will be. And when we send the follow-up email with the recording and everything of today's session, we'll make sure to include a link to that deck as well.
Awesome, thank you. So, again, I spent, before being at the department and also at Project Lead the Way, I was at my school district for 20 years. And a good portion of that 20 years at Union Public Schools was spent in an administrative role on the instructional side, and then as associate superintendent. And so sometimes people would come in and want to be a partner and want to be helped, but if they don't give you an easy entree, and Xan is the perfect example of why she had so many hooks into my particular school district, because she thought those things out on the front side. But here are just some things that are unique to ESSR that might help get the attention of that school leader so that they relinquish a little control and allow you to be part of the solution. Because they're now more than ever, as school administrators, we have to admit we can't do this by ourselves. And we need more partners at the table, not just to deliver the services, but to be part of that strategic planning and part of the funding landscape. So then we think about what we're trying to accomplish with our students, sitting down with partners and saying, here's where all the funds are. And this is scary to administrators to do with parents or even teachers. Here's where the funding is. And what we're trying to accomplish can be funded from these different resources, and starting with those most restrictive funds first and really protecting that general fund. When you have partners that understand how that funding works, it makes them even more valuable because they're coming to the table with those constraints in mind. So the first one would be like, how can we provide additional capacity for serving your students who are disproportionately affected by COVID? So already you're cluing in on the language that's already in the law. They have to show that they're doing something extra for those students, because in my state, when they sent in their uses of funds plans, and even though this was spelled out as a requirement, they said, we're providing a laptop to all students. including those disproportionately affected by COVID. Wrong answer. It has to be over and above. So if you're doing an out of school time program and you are prioritizing or being inclusive of students with special needs or students who are from the foster care system, students who are on tribal land or have a CDIB card. Any of those things show that you are knowledgeable of the funds and you are helping that district meet those requirements in the law. Again, how can we assist with that out of school time programming to help you meet your learning loss target of 20%? Because they're exhausted and you guys have amazing opportunities that we can't replicate inside of school. So getting to the table and saying, for this amount, we can provide X or Y. Now more than ever, they have money, but they also need help. And so it's a mutually beneficial situation. And then something I mentioned earlier is that uses of funds plan and budgets had to be submitted in the fall of 2021. Does that plan still align to your current priorities? I will tell you, I met with about 30 rural superintendents. We're talking districts less than 1,000 yesterday. And this was top of mind for them. They don't like the plan they sent in back then. They've got a year now under their belt. Student engagement was waning this last year. Attendance is waning. Many of their districts are down in enrollment. This is hitting them, right in the nose, both in the pocketbook and then in the reality of what's happening in the classroom, because there's more behavioral challenges than ever before. This is where, again, you bring in something different, fresh, relevant, and kids are always excited to do be a part of the great work that you guys do. Help them augment that uses of funds plan for ESSR 3, help them freshen that up and not just do maybe what was in front of them to meet that deadline, submission deadline. Help them dream a little, help them be creative, help them get something extra for kids. This is kind of the same, that's riffing off that same conversation before, and about how to make things more exciting to address whatever their pain point is. And then last of all, how can we braid funds to maximize opportunities for your students while we as partners are being mindful of this funding cliff that's looming? Last thing I will say is, with regular Title I, I do think that regular Title I funds, Title IV funds that provide well-rounded education, where you're partnering programs, out of school time experiences, the variety of things you do fit in that Title IV. I think Title I and Title IV will continue to go up. Title II, where you offer professional development, I think we'll continue to see these grow. And those are not one-time funds. These are reoccurring expenditures. So what my parting thought or a piece of advice would be, if you can forge a relationship using these more easily accessible ESSR dollars now, and if people just get a taste of what many of you offer, just the little I know of who's on the call and what your reputations or my own personal experience with what you do, if you can use that as a foot in the door, then the next conversation needs to be, how do we think differently about that Title I, Title II, Title IV allocation, so that students don't lose access to these amazing opportunities that have been created. So I did put an FAQ on there. I did also add the links to that stabilization fund portal. It is chock full. I will tell you, you remember back when I did show my state of Oklahoma slide here. If you go down, if you scroll, once you get to this screen for your state, if you scroll down, you're going to see the allocations by district. It is incredible. It's one of the most robust tools I've ever really worked with from the Fed. So it's a little lagging, but not too much as far as the fund drawdown. It's pretty reflective of where things are. So I know gosh, that was fast.
It is always fast. It's always fast. Kathy, we really appreciate it. And we are out of time for additional questions, although there aren't any right now. But what we do always offer to folks without getting your permission first, which we should, is that if you do have questions that pop into your mind, go ahead and email those to Xanne or Lauren, and we'll make sure to compile those, get those to Dr. Dodd, and get them back to you in that follow-up email at the end. This has been the second in our Lunchtime Talk series that we're featuring each week in September as we head back to school. Thank you, Dr. Kathy Dodd and the Oklahoma State Department of Education for sharing your expertise on this topic and helping us get better at successfully securing the funds that will fuel the work that we know is so critical for our students just now. This series is at noon Eastern Time next Thursday, 9/22, and at 2:30 Eastern Time on 9/29. Topics we'll cover as follows. On the 22nd, Denise Phillips from LEGO talking about nurturing play in the STEM classroom. And on the 29th, Sue Allen, Maine Guides Down East about rural STEM education. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern, we have our CHIPS and Science Act office hour. The session will focus on broadening participation. Our hosts will be Natasha Smith-Walker and Pavi, leaders of the Chicago STEM Pathways Cooperative and the South Jersey STEM and Innovation Partnership Ecosystems, respectively. Thank you all for joining us today, and we will see you next time.